Hello, in this video we're going to describe how God survived and made discoveries part 3, the furnace. So God found in the work site, which was just an empty space outside an asteroid, he found that he could create, using his staff, wormholes that emitted debris, and that he could vary the intensity of gravity, which he describes as happiness, which produced the emission of debris of different types of elements, chemicals, gases, isotopes, and liquids. And so, doing this experimentation, eventually, God tried colliding them, or putting them together. One particular combination produced an explosive reaction. This produced heat, and it also produced light. So, doing experiments with this type of wormhole, God played around with the different particles and found that there was a type of flake that when heated melted and formed rock. So that's where we get rock from. And so God used heat from that reaction and mixed it with these flakes emitted from another wormhole in order to craft himself a furnace, so it would direct heat at each end of a cylinder, which he could use to help make stuff. And so, working with this furnace, God started to play around with those flakes and made a shell that was sphere-shaped, 1/4 the size of the moon. And so God theorized that it could be more comfortable if he had gravity on there. He had an accident where he had come into contact with gravity and felt that it was better to be in that environment. Also, the talking field, which is atmosphere with air, seemed way more comfortable than he could be in body on such a place. So God attempted, after making this first sphere shape out of rock, to put gravity element in there. And this worked out to be a bit of a disaster because it was too intense gravity and was difficult for God to work with. He had to teleport himself out through a wormhole. Fortunately, he had the wormhole rod with him and was able to hold it and get himself out of there. Otherwise he'd still be there. So God then had to go back to the drawing board and start again. And how he made the shell was he did 1/2, and then he attempted cutting it, and he made both halves together and then attempted cutting it with a wormhole cutting method, and then placed evenly a smaller gravity element which appears in the form of crystals that are pear-shaped. In order to keep these crystals where they are, God had to use the furnace in order to heat up the rock and put it around the gravity element, each one, in order to hold them in there. And then once that was done, God would then have to mate the two shells together, which caused disaster. So there were a few disasters with it, and God had to start again each time there was a problem, mating the two shells together. Eventually, God created a ring furnace, which is donut shaped and heats both shells together and mates them. And that furnace is still going to this day. Both furnaces are still active today. God still uses them. So with the first shell created, which had gravity element, God now had a planet with atmosphere. God filled it with air and found that he could walk around on it. So now he had a planet with air, he could walk around on it, and it seemed like a good home, heaven. So next God had to try and find a way to heat the planet. And so this led to a disaster because God created another furnace and then tried to place it on that planet. And when he did so, it went clean through it because the gravity pulled it towards it. The furnace was 3 miles long. So it was quite huge, and it went in there and shattered the planet. So God had to start again and build a new shell and make them together. He put thicker layers of rock, and with this one he built the furnace on it. So the furnace was already attached. It was not as high as the first one, and the idea of the furnace is for it to emit the heat outside the atmosphere and just under it, and warm the atmosphere so that he could be warm and in body on his planet. So this furnace works exactly the same. It has a wormhole in it. Now, how they operate is the two elements combine that cause the explosion. One is called catalyst and lined the inside of the cylinder, and the other is fuel for the star, which is what is emitted from the black ball. And all God would have to do was, it was rigged so that he could just lift up the wormhole element rod that was attached to that black ball and place it into a slot. And in doing this, influenced the wormhole element to activate the process of emitting the fuel for the furnace. So God created this planet and then made tunnels and chambers underground. And he made water stations and mana stations so that he'd just walk up to it. It would automatically emit mana or water into a trough, and then he'd be able to drink the water and eat the mana. So mana looks like the host that we have at a Catholic church during communion. Looks exactly like it, but does not taste the same. With the water troughs, God found that if he crunched up mana and put it in the water, even though it had been around for hundreds of years, he could still drink it and not get sick. So now we have a planet and it has an atmosphere. God, when he created the chambers, they're sphere-shaped. He lined the bottom with sediment, then dirt, and then a layer of sand on the top. And you could walk around, and so you'd have half a dome that you could live in. God reverse engineered the chambers that he was created in. He made similar sorts of chambers and put them on this planet. And so God was able to create a wormhole and then reach inside the chamber through the exit point and touch the wall at a certain point, emitting a certain amount of gravity, which produced in exactly the same sort of process as how God was created, where a wormhole exit point formed inside the chamber, and it would emit soul material that knitted together, creating and filled with the soul of an angel. So the very first angel created was actually inside the chamber that God was created. And his first words were Batch. So his name is Batch. He died inside that chamber. God was afraid of him. He was much bigger than God. He was about 7 foot tall. And his soul material died as well. Through later in the first history, the discovery of time travel, it was possible for a team to go back in time and rescue Batch and remove him from that situation. The very second angel that was created on this planet that I'm describing, and his first words were Gabriel. I'm the Archangel Daniel, and I'm from heaven.